Just because the New Orleans Saints plan to host Tennessee quarterback Hendon Hooker for a top 30 visit doesn't mean that they think of him as a top 30 prospect. We got all of that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's Power Outage episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Saints, your daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Saints. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much as always, making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget you can subscribe and follow for free on YouTube wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss the latest episodes. As always, I am your host, Ross Jackson, at Ross Jackson Nola on Twitter, your New Orleans Saints expert, credentialed member of the media, senior writer and reporter over at Saints News Network of Sports Illustrated's Fan Nation, and of course here with you every single Monday through Friday on Locked On Saints. Today's episode of Locked On Saints looks a little bit different if you're watching over on the YouTube side in the midst of a power outage here in New Orleans at the moment, but you know what? Not even Entergy can stop me. We're getting these episodes ready to go for you every single Monday through Friday, so please forgive the sort of scaled back look, but hopefully for those of you that are listening over the audio side, you won't experience much difference here at all. On today's episode of Locked On Saints, we're going to get to a few Twitter Tuesday questions, including, are the Saints good, right? Can we just answer the basic question here for a second? So we'll get to that. We'll also take a look at what a mock draft for the New Orleans Saints would look like while drafting Hendon Hooker at 29, or doing the thing that I think the New Orleans Saints are really potentially setting themselves up to do. The first part of today's show, though, is the Hendon Hooker conversation. Yesterday, Ian Rappaport over at NFL Network tweeting out that Hendon Hooker was going to be headed to New Orleans for a top 30 visit. If all of it timed out the way that we expect, that means that he is here in New Orleans now or will arrive today for that top 30 visit this week. What is a top 30 visit? So a top 30 visit is a visit for draft prospects whose NFL team is bringing them in to get a look at the facility, meet some of the coaches, get a closer look at that player as well, do their own medical checks, all of these things. It's generally seen as a means of depicting real interest in a player. But I think that's a little bit too boiled down, a little bit too oversimplified. I don't think that that is necessarily the correlation when it comes to a top 30 visit. Here's what I mean by that. The New Orleans Saints over the course of the past few years have not had top 30 visits with Trevor Penning, with Chris Olave when they selected them in the first round. Obviously, there were no top 30 visits at all in the 2020 draft, but then you go back to Sheldon Rankins, no top 30 visit there as far as I understand it. Marcus Davenport, the only contact they had with him was during the Senior Bowl. Peyton Turner, same thing. Only conversation that they had with him was at the Senior Bowl. So to say that a top 30 visit indicates genuine interest in a prospect would also be to say that you're only going to draft first round players that you have top 30 visits with. And that's just simply not the way that the NFL operates. You'll see the Saints a lot of times doing top 30 visits with players from, rounds 1 through round 7, guys that they want to look at to see maybe another team might be interested in them, things like that. So to boil it down and simplify it into the Saints are having Hendon Hooker over for a top 30 visit, which means that they see him as a top prospect and as somebody that they want to draft, is a little bit oversimplifying things. Do I think that the Saints should be interested in Hendon Hooker if he's still there at 40 or 71? 71 more so, yes. 40, if you feel like that's where you want to go, then sure. Yeah, I'm not going to be mad at that selection. I don't think, though, that you take him at 29, not with your quarterback situation already solved. But that doesn't mean that another team might not be interested in taking him at the bottom of the first round. And this is where I think the Saints could be setting themselves up for a little bit of success here. Let's say that the Seattle Seahawks don't draft a quarterback with their first highest selection, their top 10 selection. Their next selection is in the early second round, upper 30s. Could they look at a team like New Orleans and say, Hendon Hooker's still on the board, New Orleans might be interested in him. Let's see if we can get them to come up off that pick. Now, more than likely, they would start that at 28, maybe 27, maybe 25. But if it worked all the way down and the Saints are on the clock at 29 and Hendon Hooker's still there on the board, there's a chance that a couple of old friends in Mickey Loomis and the Seattle Seahawks general manager jump on the phone together and say, hey, can we figure something out here? And the Saints could potentially pick up an additional top 100 selection or a selection just outside the top 100 by doing that. Similarly, the Las Vegas Raiders, if they don't solve their quarterback problem early on in the draft, could they potentially look to trade into the bottom of the first round in order to get that fifth-year option on a guy like Hendon Hooker? You could see the same thing from the Indianapolis Colts, although it seems more likely that Indianapolis will handle their quarterback situation early on in this year's draft. So when you look at a team like Seattle, well, why would they go after a quarterback in this year's draft when they have Geno Smith? Because all they have is Geno Smith. And so when you have the opportunity to get into the bottom of the first round, grab a guy like Hendon Hooker, get a fifth-year option on him, that gives you time to be able to say, yeah, we drafted a quarterback in the first round. That doesn't mean that we have to start him. And he's got the fifth-year option, which means we get to take our time with him and allow him to develop. And what a fantastic mentor a guy like Geno Smith could be to a quarterback like Hendon Hooker. So this is where I think the Saints could also be setting themselves up for success. Could they fall in love with Hendon Hooker and take him at 29? Anything is possible. Very unlikely. Anything is possible. Could they fall in love with Hendon Hooker and take him at 40? Anything is possible. Could they fall in love with Hendon Hooker and take him at 71? Anything is possible. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that those are the most likely scenarios. The Saints could also be setting themselves up to receive a phone call when they're on the clock at 29. Whether or not they take an offer, that remains to be seen. The Saints haven't traded back in any round of the NFL draft since 2007. They also haven't drafted a quarterback in the first round since Archie Manning. So neither of these two things could happen. The Saints could get on the board at 29 and say, it was great talking to Hendon, really loved him. We'll see if he's there at 71. Kalijah Kancey, come on down. Osiris Torrance, come on down. Mozzie Smith, come on down. Whoever it might be. So lots of different ways for the New Orleans Saints to go. But don't take this indication of a top 30 visit as a surefire indication that the Saints are taking a quarterback in this year's draft, or taking a quarterback in the first 2 days, and certainly don't take this as an indication that the Saints are taking a quarterback in the first round. Top 30 visits does not necessarily designate top 30 interest or top 30 projection when it comes to draft picks. Coming up next, what would happen if the New Orleans Saints took Hendon Hooker in the first round? What would their first 4 rounds look like? And what happens if they get that phone call that does give them enough to move back and then let someone else sneak up for Hendon Hooker? What could they pick up beyond that? And what might that 4-round mock draft looks like? We'll look at both of them as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by our friends over at Built Bar, the best tasting protein bar on the market. And there are still a couple days left to get your votes in for the final matchup in Built March Madness. We've got salted caramel as well as brownie batter puffs ready to go, squaring off for the championship. Who are your LSU Tigers out of these? For me, it's that brownie batter puff. There's no beating that, and there's barely any beating the puff bars as a whole. And listen, if you jump onto the website right now, builtmarchmadness.com, and vote, not only can you make sure that your favorite bar wins, but 50 of you will walk away with a free box of Built, and one lucky winner is going to get a 12-month full-year subscription to Built Bar, which is going to mean all of your favorite bars showing up to your door every single month for 12 months. So go and check them out today. BuiltMarchMadness.com to vote for your favorite bar, brownie batter puff. And why don't you grab yourself a box of Built Bars while you're there? Once again, that's Built.com for Built Bars and Built March Madness to get your votes in today. All right, family, continuing on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. What would a mock draft 4 rounds look like if the Saints drafted Hendon Hooker in the first round? And what would it look like if they traded back out of the first round? We're going to take a look at both of these, neither of which, I'm going to be honest, are extremely likely just based upon the trends of what the New Orleans Saints have done. Again, they have not taken a first-round quarterback since Archie Manning. They have not traded back since 2007. Technically, one of them is more likely than the other, which is the idea that they'll trade back because that was at least within the last 20 years, whereas the Archie Manning draft pick certainly was not. So if you're going to say that one of them is more likely than the other, then I guess the trade back one is more likely. But both of these are fun scenarios to look at. So let's take a look at it. Appreciate you as always making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day, every day. So here we'll start off with our, this one I did at mockdraftdatabase.com or NFL mockdraftdatabase.com. And so I started off at 29 with Hendon Hooker. That gave me a grade of a B. I think they have him ranked as the 50th top 50 prospect over on this big board. So me taking him at 29 doesn't look as, lowly graded as maybe the PFF mock draft simulator, which I think has him in the 90s. They have him as a top 100 prospect, but not as a top 75. And so taking him at 29 gives you like an awful grade. And so, to go with him here. Now, why would the New Orleans Saints take Hendon Hooker in the first round if they did it? It would be tough to justify, but I mean, he's incredibly talented. He's the best pre-snap quarterback in this year's draft. He's a fantastic spot thrower, which is really important to this New Orleans Saints offense. He knows how to maximize his perimeter wide receivers, but can you get him to attack the middle of the field? You have to kind of train him up through full read progression. So maybe that's one of the reasons why you also take him in the first round. A lot of people would say that that's a reason not to, but taking him in the first round gets you that 5th-year option, remember? So it kind of gives you an extra year of cost-controlled development that you could potentially invest in him. So those are some of the reasons why I think you would see a lot of people say, well, that's why they took him. And the other reason would be, obviously, they would like him. But I don't know if that's really enough for you. So then at pick 40, as I roll along here, I went with Dalton Kincaid, the tight end out of Utah. I figure if I'm going to have a rookie quarterback and if I'm going to have somebody that's going to develop behind Derek Carr for at least the next 3 years, I might as well have a tight end or a big target that he can get familiar with from the very beginning. And really sort of that 40 through 65, as my good friend David Harrison from over at Locked On Commanders did this exercise, is kind of the great spot for the tight ends in this year's draft. And there are a lot of really good tight ends in this year's draft. So I went with Dalton Kincaid at 40. At 71, I went with another guy that I think the Saints will have their eyes on. It's Gervon Dexter, the defensive tackle out of Florida. And one of the reasons why I think that they'll be in on him is Todd Grantham, who they brought in as their defensive line coach, worked with him at Florida. And there's actually a couple of players. We'll probably actually do a segment dedicated to this. The players that new coaches are connected to that could be worth paying attention to and names to know in this year's draft. So Gervon Dexter is definitely one of them coming out of Florida. So it was at pick 71. And then with Tajay Spears, running back out of Tulane at 115, that was an easy choice. Same thing, right? I want to make sure that I'm continuing to build this offense for Derek Carr, potentially post Derek Carr. If I'm drafting Hendon Hooker in the first round, I got to make sure that I've got guys maybe in that same draft class that he can continue to build chemistry with as he gets ready and as he develops and before he takes over and all these other things, if he ever got the opportunity to take over. So I kind of built around the offense a little bit more than I usually would in a mock draft like this. But with a deep edge class, a deep defensive line class, deep offensive, interior offensive line classes, I don't mind doing that within the first 4 picks. So once again, 29, Hendon Hooker, 40, Dalton Kincaid, 71, Gervon Dexter, and then you have a 115, Tajay Spears. I like all of this but the Hendon Hooker pick, if I'm being honest. I mean, like, if you swap out Hendon Hooker with, let's say, like BJ Ojulari from LSU, or maybe Tuitola Pelotu out of USC, or maybe you get Osiris Torrance in the first round at guard, and then it's Osiris Torrance, Dalton Kincaid, Gervon Dexter, and Tajay Spears. I'm elated with that draft in the first 4 picks, but my mechanism here was pick Hendon Hooker in the first round and see what you can do, and so that's the way that I did it. Now, to me, the more likely scenario, and to me, out of these 2 mock drafts, the better scenario is actually trading back. So the way that I did this was with the Las Vegas Raiders. Las Vegas Raiders were willing to send me 38, so an extra second round pick here, pick 100, which was in the 3rd round, and pick 109, which is in the 4th round, in order to get pick 29, so getting into the first round. But then I also gave up round 5, pick 148. So that kind of allowed me to take that pick 148 and then advance it to a 4th round selection at 109. So that now gives me 38, 40, 71, 100, 109, and 115. So I've got, at this point, 4 top 100 selections, 6 top 115 selections. I feel really good about that. So here's what I did with this mock draft. At pick 38, I went with Odatamawa Adebawore, the edge rusher out of Northwestern, who may have some inside versatility. I've seen a lot of people talk about like what he can do at 3-tech and things like that. I really like him as an edge rusher. I would play him at edge rusher. I don't really like the idea of bringing guys in and saying, here, you're a first rounder, now play a different role, or you're a first rounder, now play multiple roles. To me, that doesn't make a lot of sense. Why invest in that player? Let the players that worked hard enough to become drafted do the thing that got them drafted. It just doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to me. So I see him as an edge rusher, and so I draft him as an edge rusher. Pick 40, this one was easy. Running back Jahmyr Gibbs out of Alabama. Don't know how long you are or aren't going to have Alvin Kamara this season, so you might as well get yourself a different Alvin Kamara that is also going to be there for you post Alvin Kamara potentially. And so I go with Jahmyr Gibbs, the running back out of Alabama, who can catch, who can run between the tackles, who can get the edge, who could do basically anything you need him to as a running back. You can even line him up and have him line him up at wide receiver and have him and Alvin Kamara on the field at the same time toward the end of the season if you want to do that. Jahmyr Gibbs was not only the best running back at Alabama last year, he was probably their best pass catcher as well. Speaking of pass catchers, went with a big one here, 6'3", 6'4", Wake Forest wide receiver A.T. Perry, blazing speed in the 4.4s, great athleticism, good contested catch numbers in terms of his collegiate days. We'll see how much that translates to the NFL, but A.T. Perry was an easy selection for me there at 71. Then at pick 100, which is one of my new selections, this is the first pick that I got from Las Vegas, I grabbed Luke Schoonmaker, the Michigan tight end, who's hyper athletic, one of the more athletic tight ends in this year's class. Good pass catcher, solid blocker as well, is a little bit more all around, which maybe helps him translate to the NFL a little bit more quickly. So really heavy on the offense here after going to the edge early on, but then I can kind of shake that up because I've got more selections in the top 115. So just 9 picks later, I'm back on the board at 109. I go with Wake Forest defensive lineman, defensive interior in Kobe Turner, who, great pass rush win percentage, great run stop percentage, very disruptive, does a lot, very, very slept on, this guy. I don't know why he's so slept on. I'm okay with the fact that he slept on, though. The fact that you can get him outside of the top 100 while he is so clearly a top 100 player, very, very easy selection for me. And then I decided to do something a little bit different, 115. Now, this is the thing here, right? Like, by the time that I get to 115, usually I'm making my 4th selection in these mock drafts. Because of this trade, I've already made 5 selections. So I'm on my 6th selection here. So I can be a little bit greedy. I can be a little bit playful. I can get something else done here. I can be a little bit more, make kind of a luxury pick here. And I get that done with San Jose State edge rusher Viliami Fehoko. Now, of course, you'll know the last name Fehoko through, of course, Brendan Fehoko, who is formerly of the LSU Tigers. Most recently was with the Los Angeles Chargers. Not sure where he is now. But his brother, Viliami, is a really, really good edge defender, not just edge rusher. So the reason why I clarify that, 23 sacks over the course of his career, including 9 sacks last year, 7 sacks the year before that, 6 sacks back in 2020. So he's gotten better and better and better every season. But also 47 total tackles for a loss over the course of his career, including 19 last year and 12 and a half in each of the 2 years before that. On top of that, 12 passes defended as well. So he does a good job getting his hands up, defending passes at the line of scrimmage. 6'4", 274 pounds, really good size. And then also has 5 forced fumbles as well, something the Saints have put an emphasis on for the past couple of years. So I'm getting a guy that would be a fantastic rotational edge defender, probably a little bit more of a 3-4 build, but no one plays a true 3-4 in the NFL. Everybody's just kind of a mixed front. And so the Saints categorize, the way that the Saints play defense, they definitely check that box as well. But you get him out there to be somebody that can be a run stopper, that can be an edge rusher. He can defend both the run and the pass, which means you have the maximum amount of rotation, maximum Derek when it comes to Viliami Fehoko. So I love that selection there and being able to kind of get that luxury pick of a guy that I usually don't get to take because I had 6 picks in the first 115 selections. Now, fun fact for you, over the course of the past 7 years, the Saints have not selected 8 prospects. So I've already selected 6, which means I'm packaging probably my 2 5th-round picks. I'm packaging that 7th-round pick. They haven't taken 8 over the course of the last 7 years, actually. And so I'm packaging a bunch of these picks in order to be able to move up, maybe move around a little bit more. Did I need to stick around and wait between 71 and 100? No, I could have packaged 100 and a 5th in order to move up a little bit more, package 109 and 2 5ths to move up even more than that. So there's a lot of different ways that you could kind of come out of this draft making pretty much the bulk of your selections in the first top 115 with a trade like this. Just as a quick recap, 38, Adetomiwa Adebawore, the edge rusher out of Northwestern, Jahmyr Gibbs, the running back out of Alabama at 40, 71, A.T. Perry, the wide receiver out of Wake Forest, Luke Schoonmaker out of Michigan at pick 100, which was one of the selections that I got from Las Vegas. The other selection, 109, that I got from them, I used on Wake Forest, defensive interior defensive lineman. I swear I'm going to do that every time. Kobe Turner. And then I wrapped up at 115, the original 4th-round selection that I had with Viliami Fehoko out of San Jose State. So that's two possibilities in how Hendon Hooker can, in one way or another, impact the New Orleans Saints draft. Coming up next, we're going to answer some questions for you from our Twitter Tuesday here. And the first question, very simple. Are the Saints good? Might sound kind of like a elementary question, but really it's the question we should all be spending more time trying to answer. Got that coming up for you as we continue on to wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. Wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Saints with your questions for our Twitter Tuesday segment here to wrap up the show. Usually I bring up everybody's tweets on the YouTube page and stuff like that. I need internet in order to be able to do that. I don't have power, and so here we are. I'm just going to go through some of these questions, though. So we're going to start off with Cod, which is at Codfish42 on Twitter, who has a really solid question here. Are the Saints good? This is such a good question, and I think maybe like some people might see that question and kind of scoff at it and things like that. I get excited by that question because really, like, is that not the question that I should be focused on answering for you every single day, right? Like, isn't that the thing that I should be focused on all the time? And so it's nice to kind of go back to a question that is that simple, because the answer is not. The answer is not, and it's so much more complex. And so here's what I'll say. We broke down in a previous episode where the Saints have improved. Quarterback, undeniably. And then you have a couple of places that kind of have an asterisk. Wide receiver, if Michael Thomas stays healthy. Alvin Kamara, running back, depending on how long Alvin Kamara is out. Defensive interior, if the new additions are going to be better than the departures, and they aren't done at that position by any means, but bringing in Colin Saunders, bringing in Nathan Shepard, retaining Malcolm Roach, having Prince Emeli on the roster, all of that helps, but you're far from done at that position. So I think that, like, you look at, and I think safety depth, they've improved there too, but they improved in depth. They've stayed the same in terms of there. So is staying the same going to be, which they've effectively done at safety, at corner, to an extent at edge, though they did lose Marcus Davenport, but again, he only accounted for half a sack for you last year, and then an offensive line. And so does staying the same inherently mean improvement because those position groups should get better in another year? We don't really know. So it has so many caveats. So here's what I'll say. Yes, the Saints are good. Will they play good is a whole other thing, right? And this is the same conversation that we always have. They look good on paper, but what happens when they get out on the field? Our friends over at FanDuel right now, FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more about your no sweat first bet. They have the Saints with a 9.5 when it comes to their win total. That's pretty good. And that's above where they were last year when Vegas didn't know what to do with them. And how do you know that Vegas doesn't know what to do with the team? That they put you at 8-5. And they say, okay, well, if you get a winning season and you bet on it, congrats, great for you. Luke Braun and I just talked about that over on Locked On NFL on today's episode. So the way that I look at it is that, yes, the Saints are expected to be good. Will they play well? Will they mesh on the field? That will be the biggest question, in which we can come back to Codfish42's question and answer that one 4 or 5 weeks into the season. Are they still good? Are they as good as we thought they were? Are they better than we expected? I understand the cautious reservations that a lot of Saints fans are taking right now because you want to wait and see what it looks like on the field. There's nothing wrong with that. Oh, and there's still an entire draft on the way too, by the way. Coming up next, we're getting over to Chrissy, one of the OGs at Katie EZG. So let's look at this one here. Has there been any discussion or talks about the offensive line? So this is an interesting one because there have been a lot of talks from us. We haven't heard much from the Saints on that sort of on that side of things, right? Dennis Allen, Mickey Loomis speaking at the NFL owners meeting. You heard a lot of conversation around Trevor Penning and sort of sky's the limit as long as they can stay healthy. Asterisk, there's another one for you, and all those things. But we haven't really heard anything about them designating that as a position where they want to continue to add depth, continue to build. But I think it's obvious that you do. Isn't that fair to say? It's obvious that you look at 2022, you look at 2021, you look at 2020 for some of that season as well and go, yeah, you probably want to bolster your depth a little bit there. And I don't think Storm Norton, who they brought over from the Chargers, is enough to say, okay, yes, done. Have completely built that up. So I look at the draft, I look at guys like, Steve Avila out of TCU, who would be a second, third round guy. Osiris Torrance out of Florida, who would be a round one guy, but could fall to round two, right? We've seen that with interior offensive linemen before. Remember, Eric McCoy was supposed to be a first round selection. The Saints got him at what, 42, if I remember correctly, somewhere around there, like in the second round. And then you look back at, to the back of the draft, guys like Jackson Kirkland out of Washington and others. So there's a lot of different ways that the Saints can address that position. Andrew Voorhees out of USC. Like, there's so many different ways for the Saints to address that position in the draft that they can. And I think that they should. I mean, when the value's right. But I do think that sort of those bigger questions of defensive tackle, edge rusher, running back, wide receiver, tight end, that those are still bigger than the necessity of grabbing an offensive lineman in this year's draft. But that doesn't preclude you from also being able to draft an offensive lineman in this year's class. So I look at the draft as a spot to really pay attention to offensive line, not necessarily not necessarily free agency at this point. All right, getting close to wrapping up here, just a couple more. David Harrison at DHarrison82, host of Locked On Commanders, co-host over at Locked On Bucks. Which lesser-known Saints player is likely to become a national star if New Orleans lands on Hard Knocks? This is a great question. I'll tell you this much, too. I think the New Orleans Saints will do everything they have to avoid being on Hard Knocks. They do not want that distraction. But usually the player that becomes sort of the national star when it comes to Hard Knocks, it's some guy that just changed teams, or it's some undrafted free agent, or some guy returning from injury that has, a big personality. And I think we can blend effectively three of those sort of pieces. And I'll say Smoke Monday. Smoke Monday was an undrafted free agent last year, has a big personality in like the best way possible. He's an awesome guy in the locker room, awesome to watch on the field too. Big personality. And he's somebody that's now returning from injury after not getting to play his undrafted free agent rookie season. So I think that he kind of qualifies in a bunch of different ways for the guy that they're going to at least put the cameras in front of a couple of episodes and see what happens. I think another one that people would fall in love with immediately as a kind of a national star would be Rashid Shaheed. Guy's personality is just so dope. And he's super fun. So I look at both of those as guys that would be like probably immediate hits on Hard Knocks for sure. Let's get to Michael Sachs Jr. here at Michael Sachs Jr. SACHS. What's the update on PJ Williams, or will they not bring him back? Is the PJ experience over? Y'all, I think the PJ experience is over. And I think that the Lonnie Johnson signing is the biggest indicator of that, aside from the fact that PJ Williams has not re-signed in New Orleans just yet, right? Like, I think that's obviously your biggest indicator, but I do think that the indication of, signing Lonnie Johnson, who is this really versatile defensive back that could play safety, play nickel, play in the box, do all the things that PJ Williams did, but much younger, I think that's hard to ignore. And so I think the PJ experience might be over. You look at them going out there and just landing Ugo Amadi, Jonathan Abram, Lonnie Johnson Jr., Troy Pride Jr., all over the course of this offseason, bringing out all these defensive backs, and PJ Williams being none of them. I think that tells you enough in terms of where that's headed. So with Smoke Monday also coming back, with some of these other guys that are going to be back in the building, I don't know. I don't know that PJ Williams is back. I think that experience might indeed be over. All right. That's going to wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints. Appreciate you as always for making us your first listen of the day every day. Coming up on tomorrow's episode, it's Wednesday, which means it's midweek fundamentals. I'm going to let y'all know. Do y'all want a midweek mock draft tomorrow? If you do, let me know either in the comments on YouTube or by hitting me up on Twitter at RossJacksonNola. If you want another midweek mock draft, we can do one maybe where we trade up. Because I did get a question here too. I want to make sure that I shout this out. I did get a good question that I didn't read about if the New Orleans Saints, will the New Orleans Saints trade up? This is from Big Slime at Tom_1748. Or do you see the Saints trading up? And if so, to what range? So tell me what you think. And then we'll answer Big Slime's question tomorrow. Where do the New Orleans Saints trade up to? And who do they trade up for? And I'll see what I can do about making it happen and giving up a couple of different examples. So we got that coming up for you on tomorrow's episode. Appreciate you as always making us your first listen of the day. For your second listen, make sure you're going and checking out Locked On NFL Scouting. Joe Marino and Kyle Krabs, the draft dudes, giving you everything you need to know about what it takes to build a successful NFL franchise every single Monday through Friday. Find it for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you don't miss the latest episodes every single day. Appreciate you as always, y'all, for making me a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me and the show. As always, if you see me, say hi. And if you have any other questions around your New Orleans Saints, make sure you follow me on Twitter at RossJacksonNola. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how you're momming them. And trust Who Dat Nation, I'll holla at you.